All right, friends, we're having technical difficulties galore over here, but I am going to go forward anyway, because we've got a fun event today. This is an Ask Me Anything. I'm Sarah Lobkovich. I'm a strategy coach. I'm an enormous goal nerd, but not just about goal setting. I have a really strong focus on goal achievement and how we can work on changing behavior in order to increase our goal achievement. So today, what I'm going to do is answer real questions from real people that have come in over the last couple weeks in preparing for this event. Let me just double check that everything looks good to go except for all the things that aren't working, and then we'll get to it. All right. So how we're going to do this, I have questions that came in advance. So I'm going to start with those. Some folks aren't able to join live, but I'll answer for the benefit of the replay. If my lips are moving and you can't hear me, let me know. All my mics aren't working. So I'm just trusting and hoping that my onboard mic picks up enough that you can hear me. So drop me a note in the comment if you can hear me. And then hopefully you will drop me a note in the comments if you can't hear me so that I know and can sort that out. And anytime during this live, please share your comments or your questions in the comment window. Due to the technical difficulties, I didn't quite get through checking to see if any questions came in via social overnight. So I am just going to do that really, really quickly here. There was one good question, not even intended for this yesterday, on Threads from someone, but I'm going to open that one up and address it because I think it's a great topic of discussion. And then if you have questions or you had questions and sent them to me through social, and I don't answer them, then share it again in the comments. All right, well, thank you so much for joining. This is the 6th, I think, third to last. I think it's the 6th Goal Fridays event in this 8-week series. So we've got 2 more. Yep, that's right. So we've got 2 more. The next one is going to be about cascading or localizing of objectives and key results, which is a really hot topic. So that's next week on Friday. And then the following week, we will be doing a live OKR improvement session. So we'll be looking at work in progress OKRs and supporting people to help make them better, or resolving challenges that people are having with creating their objectives and key results. So if you'd like to be a guest for that one, I'll have to add you to the stage in advance. So do reach out. I'd love to have you join and be able to help out. All right, so we're going to start with a question that came in via Threads. There was a post that my friend and colleague Sarah Moon tapped me in on, asking the question or just posing the statement, "I don't believe in SMART goals. Who's with me?" And Sarah Moon tapped me in, and I'm glad she did. SMART goals are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And the achievable and realistic sounds really similar because, like, I think they are. Different people use different meanings for the A and the R. So aspirational is the alternative for the A, and then realistic, or I can't remember what the other R option is. But anyway, the SMART acronym is used a lot. It is a way to say we're going to create measurable goals. I think that's why SMART became popular, is because it's got numbers in it. So it's a way to enunciate measurable goals. The downsides I see with SMART, aside from the fact that the A and the R don't mean the same thing everywhere, different people have different meanings for the A and the R. The issue I see most with SMART goals is that what tends to happen is we set this precise, smart, measurable, time-bound goal, almost always about activity that we plan to do. So then I don't know about you. Have you ever set a goal to work out 5 days a week or to go to bed on time 5 days a week? And then how long does that stick? And then what happens on the first event that you don't stick with that goal? Smart goals are really prone to that all or nothing and falling off the wagon dynamic. So once we set our SMART goal and we're working toward it, then if we have a hiccup or we have a glitch in our system or we can't keep up with our SMART goal, it's really easy to get demotivated and then to kind of fall off the wagon of the goal. That's a psychological thing. I'm not a psychologist or a therapist, but I think it has to do with our all or nothing wiring in our brains that, once we've kind of fallen off that SMART goal wagon, then we're in the nothing phase and it's hard to get back to the all. So that's the biggest issue I see with SMART goals in practice, aside from the fact that the A and the R don't mean the same thing everywhere. That's the biggest issue I see. And also the reason I prefer to work with key results they don't have to be in the textbook format that I coach, but when we use stretch key results, so we're saying from the beginning, our key results are aspirational, stretch, empirically measurable, outcome-based goals. Then we know from the beginning they're a stretch. We don't have the all or nothing, because if we make any progress or no progress on our key result, instead of judging ourselves or letting the all or nothing kick in, we ask the question, why is this going on? Get curious. Why are we behind? What could we do differently? What might change? So when SMART goals, where we have that all or nothing falling off the wagon dynamic, with key results, we can just remain curious and in a learning mindset. So that's my, take on SMART goals. They are better than nothing. They are a way to quantify activity with a time-bound nature. If you want clear expectations about activity that's expected. But if you know my work, you'll know I talk about activity plans as planning, not goal setting. So when we are creating our plans about what we plan to do, our activities that we plan to do, I consider that planning. That's not fully within our control, but we are mostly in control of the activities that we choose, or we have more control. And so when we have that kind of control, I consider that planning. When we are creating stretch goals in a territory beyond our control that we hope to influence, so what might be possible if everything goes right? Those are the kind of goals that help lead to growth, innovation, transformation, more than incremental change. That's the perfect place for key results. And could SMART goals get you there? Perhaps. But in practice, I don't see SMART goals written that way very often. So that was a great question to start with. And then we'll go on from there. And I see we have some folks joined. So if you have questions you'd like to ask, drop them in the comment box or in the chat window. Different platforms have different things. But I'd love to hear your questions also. All right. So a kind of fundamental question came in of, I've tried all the different goal setting frameworks, but nothing seems to stick. What makes objectives and key results different, and how do you make them actually work? Well, that's a long story to how do you make them actually work, but let's break that down. So we just talked about a goal setting framework of SMART goals and some of the issues that we run into with SMART goals in practice that lead to them not always sticking. What makes OKRs different than other forms of goal setting in the model that I work with, which I call the No-BS OKR model, because I try to make it just no BS, as simple, as implementable, as well scaffolded, so that people don't have to read minds or kind of try and wing it to figure out how to operate well. What makes OKRs different in the no BS model is that we're really clear and crisp with language and our shared expectations. So we have a placemat, basically, of what I call the connected strategic stack. The connected strategic stack puts OKRs in context with other planning tools, methodologies, mechanisms that might be in use in your organization. And what we have in the connected stack is at the top, we've got our strategic inputs or our durable strategies. So that might be a strategic plan or long range strategic plan. It can even be mission vision, like that big picture. And then most organizations go right from that strategic layer at the top to their delivery plans, what they plan to do or what activities they're going to do. Objectives and key results fill the gap in the middle. I call that the alignment layer. So objectives and key results are stretch goals that we can set to help connect our strategy to execution with clarity and to align our execution to strategy with clear expectations. But then I also work with objectives and key results in combination with a concept of mandatory goals. One client's calling those must achieve goals, and key performance indicators or KPIs, which give us a pulse on how we're doing. So without going way too deep, that middle alignment layer, our objectives enunciate what direction it's important for us to travel in. So what is most important to achieve and why does it matter? They give us our direction and our shared purpose. We only have a few of them. We want to break those down to, 3 or 4 at any given time. Then each objective has key results, and our key results are empirically measurable goals that specify a start value and a finish value for something we hope to measurably impact. So again, they're not about our activity, they're about the impacts or outcomes that we hope to achieve. So our objectives and key results are those stretch goals. They're really useful when we need to change, when we need to transform, when we need to take ourselves into uncertain territory. That's where OKRs are really helpful. When we're in certain territory, when something has to be achieved and we know enough about it that we can actually commit to a goal, that's where we use those mandatory goals or commits or must achieves. That's also a place where you might consider SMART goals. So you could write your mandatories in terms of SMART goals or milestones. Milestones are complete an activity by a date. So for me, all of those fit into that mandatory goal category. And then our key performance indicators or our KPIs give us our pulse on how we're doing on important business metrics. So our KPIs aren't goals, our KPIs are indicators. Think a perfect example is blood pressure. We might watch our blood pressure. If we don't have an issue with it, we just keep an eye on it. That's treating blood pressure as a KPI. If we have blood pressure in the danger zone and we need to improve it, then we might set a mandatory. If it's life-threatening, if it's really serious, you might have to set a SMART goal. You might have to set a mandatory that you're going to pursue. But if you're relatively healthy and it's a stretch goal for you to improve your blood pressure, that's where a key result might come in. So long setup there, but what makes objectives and key results different, specifically no BS objectives and key results different, is that they actually fit in with our other planning mechanisms to fill that gap, to fill that alignment layer gap. And that gap isn't usually filled by another mechanism in organizations, specifically the gap that's filled by key results. Because key results ask and answer the question, before we decide what we're going to do, we look at our world and say, how do we want our world to be different, measurably? How do we want our world to be empirically data different? What data do we want to have different at the end of this half year or quarter? So key results let us imagine a future that doesn't exist yet, and then quantify, if everything were to go right, what would be incredible to achieve? So they give us a waypoint. They can be progress-based. So when everything is going right, what would we observe in terms of progress? They can also be the aspirational destination we aim for. So they can be, I'm trying to think of a good example. Let's say a stretch key result. I'm trying to make an analogy that actually fits the definition of a key result, which I should have at the ready. But let's say our stretch key result is, I want to climb Mount Rainier within the, this shows that I'm getting older than I used to be. But I want to climb Mount Rainier within an hour of the amount of time it took me to do it the first time around when I was much younger and much fitter. So then my measurable target is within an hour. That's a stretch because I am not in mountaineering shape right now. So if I set that as a key result, then if I try to climb Mount Rainier, I make the attempt, that's progress. If I climb Rainier, but I don't do it within an hour of my fastest time or my earlier time, then I've still climbed Mount Rainier. And if I hadn't set that key result for myself, I might not. If I had set a stretch, or if I had set a SMART goal, a specific, measurable, aspirational, or achievable, realistic, time-bound goal about, I'm going to train to climb Mount Rainier by doing X hikes with Y weight by a date. If I'd only set that SMART goal, there's a likelihood then that I would fall off that SMART goal wagon and might not actually achieve the goal at all. So key results tell us measurably what success is, but they also tell us what we're aiming for. And even if we don't achieve it, if we make progress, that's a win because our key results are in speculative territory. So that's what makes OKRs different in the way that I use them in No-BS OKRs. How to make them actually work, I'll keep that answer short because we've got a lot of questions to get to. And again, if you've just joined, drop your questions in the chat window. This is an Ask Me Anything, so ask me anything. How do you make OKRs actually work? My biggest tip there is to align on exactly what I just described in terms of, what is your stack? How do objectives and key results fit into it, and play with the other elements of your strategy and implementation stack, and get really clear with words, meanings, and coherence in what is an objective, what is a key result, how are they used, what do they look like, so that you've got clear expectations in your methodology approach that help people understand what's expected of them. So lots more available about how you make OKRs work. I have a book coming out soon. It just went into layout. The big book just went into layout. So I've got a workbook available right now. You can get that on my website. The shortcut to the website is findrc.co. And then in the top, there's a link for books. The No-BS OKR workbook PDF is available as a download right now for $19. The print version of that book is in layout right now, and then the print version of the big book, my full-length business book on how you can get connected with your own inner strategist, is called You Are a Strategist, Use No-BS OKRs to Get Big Things Done, or No-BS Objectives and Key Results to Get Big Things Done. We spell it out on the title, and lots more in there about how to make them actually work. All right, time check. So I'm going to look at the questions that came in beforehand, and we'll do something that's not so tightly OKR related. Um, Although I just have a feeling I'm going to keep coming back to OKRs because that's what happens. So great question. So I do a lot of work and focus on people who are in right-hand roles or essential number 2 roles, like chiefs of staff. A lot of times it's directors of operation or leaders of operations or strategy. You're the people who sit alongside the CEO or other senior leader as their thought partner and their implementer. So you're the extension of the leader when you're in that kind of role to help fill in the gaps that they need and actually get stuff done. So this was a question. I'm in a right-hand position. This is from a chief of staff, head of ops, who often feels caught between strategic thinking and execution. So I'm always trapped in that, like, we need to be more strategic, and I'm always fighting fires. Everything is always urgent. So how do you recommend managing that tension? Again, I said I was going to try and pick a question that would get us off the OKR topic, but I do, I can't start anywhere else but saying objectives and key results are one of the ways that you can help manage that tension. Because a lot of times when we're in those right-hand roles, we are subjected to the fire hose of urgent while also trying to help the leader pursue what is important. That references to the Eisenhower matrix, which is a method for prioritization that has 4 quadrants: urgent and important. I can't remember which order they go in, but so don't quote me on the order of this, but it's basically urgent and important, urgent, not important, not important, not urgent, or important, not urgent. I think I got those 2 backed up or mixed up. And then not important, not urgent. So we often get trapped in that type of right-hand role in what is urgent without enough time or ability to break away for what's important. By creating a couple or even one main objective and some key results about what's really important for you so that you can really focus on what's important with the limited time that you have for your focus on important work, that lets you maximize the time that you can pull away from what's urgent. Another way that OKRs can be used is to actually help us decide what not to do. So if you do a full set of objectives and key results with your leader and chiefs of staff, head of ops, if you want to learn the OKR coaching toolkit, that's definitely reach out to me. I've got a really killer training, really comprehensive, but also really successful in terms of the student coaching outcomes that we see who go through the No-BS OKR coaching program. So you can actually learn to coach your leader to create a set of OKRs for the organization or for the company or for the team that you lead with your leader. And if you do that, then you've got something that shows here is what is most important, or here's what's most important for us to achieve in our stretch territories. Again, I like to also make clear what are our mandatories. So we've got crisp clarity about both what our stretch aspirations and goals are and what's required of us. And if you do that, and then something is not on that 2 pages or that 1-page view, then you have to question, is this something we should be doing? So a lot of the kind of urgent and tactical work that chiefs of staff tend to get tasked with or land on their plate, sometimes we need a framework to be able to question, is this something that's really important? And is it important for me, for my time? Or is this something that we either should do less of, we shouldn't do, or that person should maintain the ownership of and take care of on their own? So that's the other big coaching I would give for our chiefs of staff is who are struggling to make that balance between strategic thinking and execution is develop your toolkit for not saying yes to everything. Develop a framework for deciding, is this a me thing, or is this something that I need to facilitate the other person's ownership of when they come to me? Because your behavior creates spoken and unspoken expectations of other people's degree of ownership for their own issues and challenges. So cultivating the ability to have someone come to you with a problem, you can assess it and say, I think this one they really need to own. Then you're going to behave differently if you've made the decision that they should maintain ownership versus you adopting their problem as yours to solve. All right, so I've seen a few people kind of come and go on the live stream. If you've just joined, this isn't Ask Me Anything. I am going off of, I have some questions that came in beforehand, but I would love to take live questions. So if you've joined and you have any questions, you can drop those in the comments, drop them in the chat window. We'll go for a few more minutes. All right, so another question that I really loved because I relate with it a lot is my podcast is called Thinky Doers, and I'm like, this person's got to be a thinky doer. But the question was, I'm energized by problem solving and solving of complex puzzles. I sometimes get lost in that or lost in optimization. How do you know when to stop iterating and just ship it? Or how do you know when to stop iterating on strategy and just ship it? Such a good question. I should have prepared myself for this and had at my fingertips Erica Hall's book, Just Enough Research, is a really good read. It's short and sweet, but it's a really great read for people who do strategic work or who have those puzzle solving brains. I'm definitely one of them. One of the things that Erica says in this book is about how to decide when you've done enough research on something. I mean, the title is Just Enough Research. And I don't want to spoil it because I want you to read the book, although I think it's out of print now. It might be, which is really sad because it's a really, really good book. So just in case you can't find it, one of the things that I learned from Erica Hall in Just Enough Research is that when we're researching and we get enough into the research that we start to notice the patterns, then that's when you might say, all right, I think I've got enough to move forward. So if you're wired for solving complex puzzles perfectly and thoroughly and absolutely completely beyond any doubt, that has to happen in some environments, like think healthcare research. But in a lot of the strategy creation spaces that we're all working in, the outcomes don't have to be that perfect. They don't have to be that complete. They have to be good enough. And so if you're in a territory where you're building goals or you're building a strategy, you're doing your research, remember, do your research. Sorry, Alexa's reminding me to get ready for my day. I need to remember to turn that off on Fridays. All right, so research. Just enough is when you start to notice the patterns. So you don't have to solve the whole puzzle every time. So when you're in one of those solving complex puzzles kind of projects that you get into, you can stop and notice, wait, am I starting to see the patterns? Am I starting to see the threads that tie things together? You don't have to wait for those to fully form unless you're in one of those, really serious or precise life or death kind of situations. So So that is also basically the way that I think of when to ship a strategy. So when is a strategy done enough? I think strategy for the work that I do now, especially in the high change, transformation, innovation space, we are never going to create a strategy that's a forecast of the future. Right now, we don't even know. Like, I mean, I have clients that aren't doing anything until after next week because I'm based in the US and we have a large presidential election next week. So I have clients who have scenarios. They haven't finished their strategic planning for next year because what their world is going to look like is highly uncertain right now. So we take that into account. And we say, our strategic work can only be so correct as we know what the known variables are. And so when the known variables are fewer, when we have a lot of unknowns, or when we have a lot of speculation in our scenario, then we're going to develop a plan based on our vision of the future that we want to actually yield. And then we're going to work toward that. But there's no sense in making that plan, a perfectly instrumented, completely documented, completely finished, perfect strategy, because stuff's going to change. There's just too many variables when we're working in high change areas. So I am a always constant recovering perfectionist. It's been a huge lesson for me to learn to work in low fidelity, or to learn to do just enough research or just enough strategic planning to be able to give us alignment and shared clear expectations to go forward. I think it's one of the reasons I was so drawn to objectives and key results with my background in strategy and strategic planning. Is we can create objectives and key results very, very quickly. We can create them at low fidelity. We can treat them as theories or experiments in how we want to do better. We can work toward them, and no matter what happens, we're learning. And so, especially in those high change spaces, this kind of answers one of the other questions I got about from someone who works in startups and says our world is changing too fast for us to be able to set goals or develop a strategy. What do we do when all the variables are changing all the time? Even when the variables are really uncertain, you still want to give yourself a compass. You don't want to be just wandering aimlessly. And so the objectives and key results, write them quickly, low fidelity. Don't try and make them perfect. Don't try and forecast the future. Envision the future that would be amazing to create. And then you can use that vision of the future as your compass through the objectives and key results. All right. So I have a couple other questions that I was sent in beforehand. Again, if you have any questions live, go ahead and drop them in the chat window. Let me just see if there's anything else that we're going to cover here today. So I think we got almost everything. There was one really, I struggle with how to answer some questions that come in because I am fascinated with the brain, but I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not an MD. I'm not a psychologist. So I am really careful about my lanes, as I am a nationally board certified health and wellness coach, but that has a limited scope of practice. So in that, I don't diagnose or treat conditions. I just have a special skill set around helping people plan behavior change toward increasing their health and well-being, and put in place their own plans and goals around how to improve their health and move forward on the well-being spectrum. So out of illness toward wellness. But I did get a question from someone who their specific question was, I'm a neurodivergent professional in a strategic role. I often see connections others don't. How can I communicate these insights effectively without overwhelming my team? Like, basically, how can how can, as neurodivergent people, can we communicate better with our colleagues who might not be wired the same way we are? I'll start by saying I think that our colleagues could do a little bit better job of being open to thinking the way those of us who are neurodivergent do. Not everything needs to be presented in completely neurotypical terms. But that aside, I have so much empathy for the person asking this question. I spent my entire adult life wondering what was wrong with me at work because I didn't realize that my brain was wired differently until my mid to late 40s. So for folks who are neurodivergent, whether you're in a strategic role or a tactical role, you may see connections other people don't. When I was in my agency days, I met a wonderful person named Molly. Hi, Molly, who introduced me to the concept of having a linky brain. And it's stuck with me ever since. That was, again, before I knew that my brain was wired differently. But when she said some people have linky brains, I was like, oh, that is exactly what it is. And then other people don't necessarily have those linky brains. And so just like the person who sent in this question, we might struggle to communicate because we see links that other people don't. So how can you communicate those insights effectively and in ways that anyone can understand, even if they don't match your cognitive type? So this is somewhere where I'd say we have a couple of tools. We have the tool of fidelity, which I'm going to make notes for myself so I don't forget. So we have the tool of fidelity, and we have the tool of objectives and key results, and we'll come back to that. So I mentioned fidelity first because just like the puzzle brain, I love that I got these questions because it means that my work is finding the right people. Just like the person who asked the question about solving complex puzzles or about having a puzzly brain, when we are neurodivergent, we may really enjoy that puzzling, that research, the insight development, the time spent in our special interests, for example. And so there's that. There's the piece of we have to manage our hyperfocus. We have to manage our attention so that we stay in focus and flow without getting sucked into hyperfocus where we have time loss and we lose all track of time and we spend way too much time on things that we should prioritize differently or allocate different time usage for. So that's one part of fidelity, is just managing your time investment and your focus investment. The second piece of fidelity is for a lot of folks who are wired differently. You might have had all sorts of experiences in your early childhood, in your school, in your workplace, where your work was not seen or recognized or valued the way that you needed it to be. I don't actually, like I said, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm a health and well-being coach. So I don't actually know how perfectionism develops. But anecdotally, I do see a lot of perfectionist tendencies in the neurodivergent adults that I work with. And I do think part of that is adaptive. It's partly a coping mechanism that if you've been told for your early childhood and through your schooling years that your work isn't what people expect it to be, your schoolwork or your work or your habits or methods of working aren't what people expect, a lot of us who are neurodivergent develop really strong radar for trying to figure out what's expected of us, like trying to mind read, trying to read and sense the unwritten rules in workplaces and in other social structures and cultures. And that mind reading and those big antennae, I think, can sometimes result in those perfectionistic behaviors where we are trying so hard to get things perfect so they're not arguable. So they're infallible. So we've answered every conceivable question anyone could ask. And we've gotten the work to a point where it is absolutely, I don't want to use the word bulletproof. We've gotten the work to a point where it just can't be argued with. And we feel safety in that if we get the work to that place. I don't know about you. My experience when we get the work to that perfect place is that then when we present it or share it with our colleagues, the result can sometimes be just crickets. It's overwhelming for people to see something that finished, or it can also be criticism, because I think work that looks fully finished is not as likely to elicit collaboration. That's a concept that comes from user experience. It's why a lot of early user experience work is done with paper instead of with computer models, because the computer models look more finished. It doesn't elicit collaboration and collaborative feedback the way that lower fidelity models do. Okay, so long. Sorry, I was trying to keep these answers short, but these are just such good questions. So fidelity is a helpful tool. If you are someone who is neurodivergent, no matter what your role is, you might have a standard fidelity. Like you might be wired for doing low fidelity work and then putting it out there before it's cooked enough that it's ready for discussion with others. And then at that point, you're putting the work out at too low of a fidelity because the feedback might be overwhelming. You might want to do a little bit more work to get things not to high fidelity, but to a good collaborative fidelity where some of the basic questions are answered enough. And you can judge this by working with other, collaborators, basically, trusted collaborators. Or if you're one of the folks who I see a lot of, who's wired for trying to get the work perfect before you show it to anyone, then you'll have huge gains if you make the shift to knowing you have a spectrum of fidelity that your work can be delivered based on. Sometimes we have to do that high fidelity, semi-perfect or close to perfect, as good as possible work. But a lot of times, you're going to have better collaboration with others if you aim for somewhere on that collaboration spectrum that is less than high fidelity. So that's a long answer about fidelity, but I think that's one of the biggest things for those of us who are neurodivergent is just recognizing that different people need different amounts of information. We can't satisfy everyone with information. It's always going to be too detailed or not detailed enough. I love building documents that have like clickable layers so that people can actually go to the level of fidelity that they need. But you can also make intentional decisions about the fidelity of the work product that you create, knowing that lower fidelity but smart work that's going to come out of your amazing brain can be good for encouraging collaboration and getting people to come along with your thinking, where higher fidelity work might not be as solid for encouraging collaboration with others. It might elicit more criticism, which is one of the things that those of us who are neurodivergent might really struggle with. All right, and then I mentioned objectives and key results. I love objectives and key results for bridging the neurodivergent neurotypical divide in the workplace, because objectives and key results are two words that we can give crisp meanings and clear examples and kind of guidelines for how to use. And when they're used in workplaces, that crispness and that clarity and those words and meanings fill in heuristics gaps that might exist between different people. Because if we just say, go write goals or go create a plan, every person is going to have a different idea of what that means, or go create a strategy. Or the worst is when people get the feedback that either you're not strategic enough, or this is really overcomplicated, I need it to be more tactical. So when we get that kind of feedback, objectives and key results are a really handy way to get thinking down on paper about what's most important to achieve, why it matters, and how you might quantify progress or success. Because if you can do that, then you can take that to your collaborators. You can ask in low fidelity, hey, here's what I think our objective and key results are. Am I aligned? Do you agree? Or what would you say differently? So objectives and key results become, for neurodivergent people, a way to distill thinking down, to distill those connections that you see that others don't, down into a framework that can be clearly communicated and understood by others. So I went way off on that question, but I just wanted to give as best an answer as I could given the scope of my practice. All right, well, we're about 1 minute and 40 seconds over time. I'm sorry to keep you a little late. I want to thank you for joining today. If you're curious to learn more about my work, you can visit youareastrategist.com to sign up for the pre-launch list for my upcoming print versions of my books and audiobook. We're going to start recording the audiobook right away now that the manuscript is moving into layout. I also have a new resource available. I'm wrestling with the name, but to start, I called it the Strategic Operators Power Half Hour, and it's a 2-worksheet document that basically walks you step by step through the thinking to create an objective and key results for an issue that you're facing. But then we don't stop with the creation of the objective and key result. Part 2 is using some of my skills and evidence-based practices from my health and well-being coaching background to help you actually plot a behavior change plan to increase your goal achievement likelihood. And that is, let me see if I can, the easiest way to find that is just to go to findrc.co and click on the top bar of the website. That'll take you right to the Strategic Operators Power Half Hour. So thank you so much for joining. I need volunteers for not next week, but the week after. So if you're interested in some live OKR coaching, let me know. You can go to findrc.co/contact and let me know there, or comment on any of the social media. Reach out that way. So thanks all for tuning in. Fantastic questions, and I'll see you next time.